Welcome to the Staying on Course with Collaboration webinar presented by the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, United Way of Central New Mexico. Special thanks to U.S. Bank for sponsoring this webinar. I am pleased to introduce Mark Bennett with Decision Resources. Mark has worked with local, regional, and international nonprofit organizations to help them build cultures of collaboration.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today. Thank you for your interest, and I look forward to offering you insights from my experience about this ongoing challenge that a collaboration has to move forward. Collaboration cannot take place without effective coordination and cooperation that focuses the joint effort. The shared vision of what we want to accomplish together provides the direction and the challenge. In order to increase the likelihood that the effort will lead to what we want, an intelligent plan is essential. Through the plan, the organization will respond to the challenges that inevitably arise on the road toward your vision of success. I've been helping groups with strategic planning for over 20 years. During this time, I always ask my nonprofit clients for a copy of their existing plan. It's not uncommon to find that A, they don't know where it is, B, they can't find it, but they can find it, but it mostly sits on a shelf somewhere, or C, they've used it, but there's never been a careful assessment of the outcomes of the plan. In our internal and external collaborations, we need to raise the bar and expect more out of the planning process. A good plan does need to be strategic in addressing the challenge of the operating environment in an uncertain future, but it needs to be more than this. It must be wise because it includes three dimensions. First, there's sincere consideration for those who are and will be affected by the plan's success or failure. Second, diverse perspectives involved in the planning remove blind spots and shape a plan that addresses the realities surrounding the organization and foreseeable trends. And third, there's alignment with fundamental values and principles. Today we're going to examine this critical issue of wise planning as an active, ongoing process, as a journey. One of the most remarkable and large collaborative planning efforts in history was the invasion of Europe by the Allies during World War II. The leader who oversaw the planning of D-Day was Dwight Eisenhower. He commented that planning is essential, but plans are worthless. Planning is dynamic. It's not static. It's not about a document. It's an ongoing process, not a product developed every few years. Let's begin by returning to the definition of collaboration from the first session. It is fundamentally important that collaboration has an answer to why do we do this, and that answer is to create something that cannot happen without this kind of cooperative engagement. Collaboration is the current reality of the old phrase, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In order to birth something new, your plan must be well-founded and responsive to the essential characteristics of a collaborative effort. So I want to summarize them briefly. First, there's a shared sense that your plan holds your collaboration together and that you need each other to move forward. There's room for differences, and inclusion is practiced to continue to bring you together as you develop the plan. Even if the plan is developed by a small group, there is engagement with others to improve the plan and assure broad consensus support. Within the collaboration, all the roles, the role of a leader, the role of a senior manager, the role of a team leader or project leader, the role of an employee, the role of external partners, and the role of clients in the community are engaged in a shared effort to make the plan work. And finally, there are healthy, transparent norms for how plans are developed, communicated, and assessed that your stakeholders internally and externally can count on. Wise planning involves also all the other cornerstone practices that have been a part of this webinar that keep you on the road to mission success. So wise planning, like the other cornerstone practices, depends upon healthy, robust dialogue. It includes the kind of difficult, important values-based decisions that we spoke about in an earlier session, and it inevitably also requires the negotiation of certain kinds of choices and priorities that we addressed in the collaborative negotiation webinar. So in a way, wise planning puts it all together and calls upon all the cornerstone practices. To hold a collaboration together and move forward to success, you need consensus support that catalyzes wholehearted effort to implement them. In order to do this and attract support, the plan must be credible and clearly communicated. Also, as we talked about before about values-based decision-making, the strategy involved in a wise plan is a matter of the heart as well as the head. Values and basic beliefs exercise a real gravitational pull on your collaboration's direction. And so it's very important during the planning process to continue to touch into these fundamental values and beliefs in a clear way. So now let's take a look at this road of planning together and consider what qualities a plan needs to develop in your collaborative effort to move you towards success. At this point, I'd like you to consider a poll question that should be coming up on your screen about your own experience with strategic planning. So I hope you will answer this question to engage with me a little bit more about your experience. In order to respond successfully to challenges and act to seize opportunities, a collaborative partnership or a collaborative organization needs to be resilient, capable of moving and reforming its efforts to deal with possible setbacks and inevitable changes and developments in current and emerging conditions. There are three essential qualities that a wise plan can foster in your collaboration. First, it can enable a greater adaptability and bring your resources to where they are needed. That's what intelligent planning does. I've never worked with a nonprofit that felt that they had all the resources they needed. So there's always this question of adapting limited resource to needs that exceed the resource. Second, you can focus those resources in an optimal way with intention and determination to exert leverage that's sufficient for the problem, the challenge, or the goal to generate the kind of results you want. That's what a good plan does. And the third thing is it engages you in an ongoing conversation that allows you to nimbly move in the direction that your mission and your vision require. You're engaged with the people internally to continue to talk about what do we need to be doing now within an existing plan, even if it's a long-range plan, nimble enough to shift gears or direction to respond in a timely way. So with those three qualities brought online, you've automatically increased the level of possibility of what your organization can achieve. Now let's consider what gets in the way of a planning effort that creates a wise, coordinated approach to your collaboration's future success. A wise plan is not simply a matter of bringing a few people or the whole organization together in a room for a day or two to produce a plan. You need to be prepared to overcome anything that blocks your path forward to a fully implemented plan. You begin to do that by anticipating common mistakes that you can avoid when you convene the planning process. The first thing that I see regularly in my work is that planning processes are ill-designed. In order to bring the right people together for the right amount of time in a good place that's congenial and supportive of the effort, and bring the kind of resources to bear that you need, including adequate preparation and in some cases research, you have to think about all those things in advance. It's not a good use of people's time to bring them into a room without some forethought and planning and readiness. The second, and perhaps the most common mistake that I see, is there's an under-inclusion of key perspectives. There's not enough input from stakeholders. Even if they're not going to be in the room, sometimes it can be very powerful to interview key stakeholders ahead of time and get their perspective on various issues that are going to be addressed during the planning process. Sometimes there's not enough attention to making sure that the conversations are not going to be combative and debate-oriented, but collaborative and dialogue-oriented, so the atmosphere is safe and encouraging for people to bring up their different points of view. Candor is essential in order to have a good planning process. The opposite mistake to the under-inclusion is to include too many people and therefore overburden the process of the conversations that need to happen with such a large number of people that it's rather chaotic and it's very ineffective and unproductive. So you have to think about who the right people are, no more, no less than the right number with the right amount of perspective. Another thing that is a very common mistake that I see is that plans are created often with enthusiasm, but they're executed and implemented in ways that are very unjust to the amount of investment that was made. After this excitement and the creation of what people believe is a good plan, then there's a lack of review, there's a lack of reconsideration and modification, and there's a lack of communication out to include the other people who are stakeholders around the plan and their engagement with the forward motion the plan needs. So there's a question that's come in about how do I determine the right size of the group? Well, I start with a guideline that a good size working group that allows for diverse perspectives but isn't unmanageable is 6 to 10 people. I work regularly with groups of a larger size where there needs to be larger representation, but it's usually a good idea to have a skilled facilitator if you're working with groups of 16 to 25. So a good self-facilitated size working group is 6 to 10 people. That's small enough for an intimate and an in-depth conversation. It's large enough to consider some diversity of representation, and you can also include surveying people who are not in the room to gain additional perspectives to make sure that you have enough stakeholder engagement. So once you've set up the process to succeed and avoided some common mistakes, begin to think about the elements of a sound plan that already exists, so you build upon what is. You don't reinvent the wheel, and you also focus on exactly what needs to be developed. So the elements of a strategic plan, a wise plan, can be thought of like a star. You design the integrity of the plan in by focusing on each element and making sure they're all present. Most organizations already have a clear mission. The mission may not need to be tuned up, but making sure that the mission statement is clear, and we're going to talk more about what that really entails in a bit, and it's commonly understood and effectively formulated is very important. The second is that there's a well-designed and defined set of core values that really guide the conduct and the aspirations of the organization, of the collaboration as it moves forward. You might think of these as the base of the plan. If this five-pointed star is an individual, these are the legs of the plan. They're where the power to move forward and drive the plan comes from. The head of the plan is a vision, a picture, an image of your desired future, whether it's in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Most of the small to medium-sized nonprofits that I work with don't tend to plan out farther than about 3 years. With large, complex organizations, you may have even 10 and 20-year plans, but typically a 3-year time horizon is a good length of time for a lot to be able to be accomplished, but that it's near enough for people to grapple with in a realistic way. Once you've got the head and the legs, then what you do is put the arms around the plan that can really take hold of the challenges that you face. The first one is an honest understanding of the operating environment, which includes the current and the near-term future that you're going to have to navigate through in order to move towards your vision. The second is a set of actionable goals that focus the effort in a concrete way and enable detailed planning underneath it with deadlines and accountability and the allocation of your resources. So now let's look more carefully at each of these 5 elements. So I want to use an example here throughout the elements to give you a specific idea of what each entails. So before I talk about a clear sense of mission, I want to tell you about an organization. It's a remarkable organization. It started in a very small way in South Africa in the mid-90s, in the black townships, working with the poorest of the poor to offer educational opportunity and enable people to begin to leave lives of servitude and marginal employment and work in the business world. It's called the Community and Individual Development Association, or CIDA, C-I-D-A. They formally started in 1999. They had in mind, as I said, to work with people on the margins and give them a business education. Their mission is to provide wider access to quality education which contributes to the full development of every learner, and to foster good citizenship and harmonious coexistence. They were formed at a time when there was tremendous polarization and hardship within South Africa. So now let's talk about what a clear sense of mission requires. It's so tempting in wise planning to leap toward action in the future, but remember that the base of a good plan begins with an effective statement of purpose. This clarity comes when a mission statement passes 3 tests. It's memorable. People can remember it enough to be able to say it and tell other people. It's inspirational. It speaks to something fundamentally needed and important that draws people to it. And finally, it's filled with that sense of purpose moving toward the future. So at the time that CIDA was formed, the need for quality education for the kind of people they were serving was overwhelming and almost completely unmet in South Africa. And as I said before, the level of social unrest and unhappiness in South African society was remarkably high. Their mission focused on the development of human potential and this ability to integrate into a society instead of standing on the margins. It spoke directly to the hearts and aspirations of the people that they wanted to reach and serve. And it also spoke to the hearts and minds of the people who might become their supporters. So let's begin to take a look now practically on how you might look at your mission statement. So among the things to think about in assessing your own statement of mission and what it needs is it brief enough? 20 words or less is a good guideline. When you begin to add too many things in a mission, it tends to overburden, it tends to keep it from being memorable, and it tends to dilute the power of a succinct, focused mission statement. It answers the essential, why do we exist? Why is this effort important? Why should you support what we're doing? Why is this needed? It clarifies basic direction. The seed mission statement was all about a future that needed to be born, about potential that was latent. So it was filled with that sense of purposeful forward motion in a society that was stuck in patterns that had governed it for a long time. Here's a different example that you might take a look at of what I think is a very well-drafted mission statement I came upon the other day in an annual statement of the Nature Conservancy. The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And underneath it in blue, you can see what many people would call a slogan or a tagline. It's some key words that grab some essential element of the mission statement. You know, these things end up on websites. They sometimes end up on bumper stickers. Sometimes they end up on T-shirts. But it's often paired with the mission statement to put a punctuation mark on the language of the mission. So you can see that this mission statement and its tagline focus directly on the fundamental why. If all life depends on lands and waters, then our ability to conserve them is clearly essentially important work. It's value-laden, the values of environmental preservation, the sanctity of life on the planet, the stewardship of scarce resources. All those are evoked within a very strong, elegantly simple statement of mission. So these values that are part of the powering of the work of our collaborations in the nonprofit sector, the mission and the core values, really need attention. There's a tendency in a number of my nonprofit clients just to list values using big words like integrity and excellence and quality and service to the poor, none of which are unimportant things to state. But it's important to go beyond those big words in order to really harness the power of values. So there are three things that values can do to help a collaboration strengthen its purposeful focus. First of all, it increases accountability. It begins to articulate the kinds of things that are aspired to in the way that you do the work that you do. In effect, it raises the bar on the standards that you're setting for yourself, because a statement of mission and a statement of core values are fundamentally promises. They're promises to the people who fund you, the people you serve, the people within the collaboration, and it's a strong thing to give your word and to do it in a very explicit way. Finally, within the planning process, the articulation of core values provides some really important criteria when you have tough choices and priorities to set. So this work to articulate values in a very strong way deserves some additional attention. It's essential to the integrity of the collaborative effort that these choices between competing important and good things are resolved based on principle, not power, politics, or personality. And these well-articulated values will help you guide and deepen the dialogue that you need to have about your collaboration's future. So I want to give you a very simple framework that you can use to take your existing statements of your values and enhance the articulation and the usefulness of your statements of what's important to you. So typically, as I said, people stop with the big word and it becomes a bit of a laundry list. So well-defined values not only include what the word is, but it also includes a statement of basic meaning. And the best practice that I've seen, and the one I recommend to my clients, is that you go beyond that and come up with a short bulleted list of what does this value look like for your organization and your collaborative effort as you put it into action. So let's take a look at an example. The word integrity is a very common core value in organizations with good reason. It's a fundamentally important thing that has everything to do with your credibility and your relationship with others. Here's a statement by one of my clients about how they define this word. honesty, directness, and respect for commitments made. So with a little bit of additional language, you begin to give some texture to what this word means to your collaboration. What would that look like in action? This organization, which happens to be in the healthcare sector, took three dimensions of what integrity looks like and laid them out. We foster trust by being truthful and empathetic. We are authentic and courageous, aligning what we are thinking, saying, feeling, and doing. And we are responsible and follow through on our commitments. So I encourage you, as you continue to work with your collaboration effort, to articulate the values that really guide you and that you aspire to hold to in the way that you execute the work together, and begin to define them using this framework. It will bring you help and power in the way that you do your planning. Once you have clarity about mission and values, then you can begin to imagine what you want to achieve together. So what does future success look like? Let me give you an example from a very different area before I come back to this South African educational nonprofit. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the late 50s had a mission that had to do with exploring and understanding space in order to develop and increase the storehouse of human knowledge. So that was their mission. Then there was a president in this country who was elected named John Kennedy, and he articulated a vision for the country that completely changed the NASA plan for what they were doing and how they were doing it. He came up with a vision statement that was elegantly simple, that focused a 10-year effort that nobody anticipated could succeed. His vision was to put a man on the moon and return him to Earth again at the end of the decade. That became the NASA vision, a very clear picture of what success would look like. It galvanized an effort that created technologies and possibilities that didn't even exist in people's imaginings at that point, like a rocket ship that had a propellant sufficient to go to the moon and orbit it, and a landing vehicle that nobody even knew what would look like that could take somebody down to the moon's surface and return them to the rocket ship. The challenges of a bold yet conceivable picture of a desirable future completes the framework that is necessary to focus the rest of the planning effort. So let's look more at what a clear vision offers. With CETA, the founders of this organization wanted people who were working within the mainstream of South African life. Their vision was of poor black people who had enough education and enough sense of themselves to fully integrate within the economic structure of society and no longer stand on the margins. And with that, their vision was of a prosperous South Africa through relevant and affordable quality education. They wanted the people that they educated to become leaders, to become full citizens. That was the compelling vision that was so far beyond where they started, but it was what had galvanized them to begin the work. A clear vision offers this dynamic tension between the present and the desired future that can act like a pulling force that pulls people forward together towards this future that is compelling to them. What it does is continue to sustain the heart and the effort that's needed by inspiring people towards a future that they want. And it enables then, with that compelling goal out there on the far horizon, to begin to think about what needs to happen that moves us in that direction, to set interim goals and the actions that support them in ways that are meaningfully forward-moving. And finally, and this is critically important in the nonprofit sector, It wasn't as important for NASA, who had government support, but nonprofits depend on people who are willing to support them with their money, with their volunteer effort, and a compelling story can attract the funding and other support that nonprofit collaborations need in order to move forward. So wise planning is hard-headed and practical. It uses the resources available to move toward what you want. But in order to do that, you've got to be smart and you've got to get the map right. You've got to know what you're up against and what you have to move through and around in order to move towards your vision. You need to bring the right people together into a dialogue that provides a 360-degree view of the territory and maybe what lies around the bend. So this is called the operating environment. And it's an area where it's very easy to have blind spots, particularly if you have too small a planning group that doesn't have adequate perspectives to fill in those blind spots so that your eyes are open and you're pragmatic and hard-headed about what you need to do. So in real estate, they say location, location, location. And in planning, in the nonprofit world, we should say stakeholders, stakeholders, stakeholders. It's fundamentally important to be very intelligent and engaged with who your stakeholders are and what their cares and concerns are if you're going to create a wise plan. The final thing is you need some common sense and precautionary foresight. None of us has a crystal ball, but we can intelligently consider about what is knowable or probable about the next period of time. Again, in this area, a diversity of perspectives is fundamentally important to make sure that you're really opening your eyes, looking ahead, and looking around. It's a common mistake to rush the planning without developing a situation analysis that can provide the context for your orientation and further planning. You cannot be wise without being pragmatic and thorough. So let me come back to CETA. Imagine the society within which they were operating, the operating environment that was around them. They had no money, they had overwhelming need for their mission, and they had a vision that was so far beyond their abilities that they must have regularly wondered what they were doing. The level of racial polarization and violence in South African society at that time was extreme. South Africa had the highest murder rate in the world, a factor of 60 times more than a country like Spain. So amidst this climate of overwhelming violence and poverty, there was cynicism, there was alienation of potential donors who were in fear about the black majority and the coming of democracy. This is the environment that they had to intelligently navigate without resources. I'll tell you in a little bit about how they did it. So a situation analysis involves us looking both at our internal resources and what we have within the collaboration and what we're functioning with externally. So typically the internal situation analysis comes up with a list of strengths and assets and a list of problems reflected in weaknesses or gaps that we have to deal with. You do that by thinking about very carefully about your available resources at every level, not just the human, but the material and the social resources, the networks. All of those are fundamentally important to inventory. Then you need to be very appropriately self-critical in looking at your current performance level. And thirdly, what are you trying to do and doing right now, and how is it working? So that's this assessment that I think you need to make of an existing plan if you have one, or the other efforts that you're making in terms of assessing how you're doing. Fundamentally important to be a tough grader, if you will, if you're going to be an honest and a good planner. In the external environment, you want to think about what represents potential opportunities and what represents threats or challenges or barriers to your ability to move your mission forward. The kinds of things that you ought to consider in a good situation analysis, first of all, include trends. You can see a little acronym there. What are the political trends? What are the economic or environmental trends? What are the social trends and demographics that you're dealing with? And what's happening in the technological realm? This webinar is an interesting example of a technological trend. One of the things that I'm seeing as I work with nonprofits, particularly internationally, is the cost of bringing people together for live training and the cost of bringing talent from other parts of the world. If you have to fly somebody to you, is more than the resources they have. So they're taking advantage of all these emerging internet technologies to very powerfully educate and train a diverse and distributed workforce. So those are the kinds of trends that you want to be mindful of. You want to be thinking intelligently about your clients and those you serve, your customers, the people who pay for or fund you to do what you do. What changes are happening there? We've been through a downturn in the nonprofit funding sector that happened in 2008 with the change in the market conditions. Obviously that was a trend. And it affected nonprofits seriously. Did any people anticipate that and see that coming, or were some people prudent in thinking, what if market conditions change? How should we configure our fundraising? Should we continue to depend on private foundations to the extent that we have been, or should we be seeking and reaching out to individual donors in our community more? Finally, to think about those who are doing what you do and may in some sense be competitive within your mission space and may also be appealing to some of the same donors that you appeal to. Who are the potential collaborators and partners who are out there who you're not yet working with? Those are the kinds of intelligent questions and conversations that a good situation analysis will reveal and help position you to plan effectively. So remember that credibility and integrity and the wisdom of a plan comes back always to its relationship to your stakeholders internally and externally. So in order to wisely plan, it's important to segment the audience of your stakeholders and think about them discreetly. A stakeholder may be an individual or a group inside the collaboration or in the surrounding community of funders, clients, and interested parties. There may be direct links between the stakeholder and the plan where they stand to benefit or be negatively impacted, or the connection to the plan may be more general. Having a stake means having some reason to be interested or concerned. The communication of a good plan anticipates these concerns and addresses them carefully. So once you've identified the range of stakeholders that you have, a good planning process begins to plan for their engagement with the plan during its formation and when it's completed. So at the center, you have the people who are going to shape and form the plan, the people who will make it. They have a stake in the plan that's very powerful. Then you have people who I call consultants. Those are people whose significance to you to provide additional perspective, or because of their need to support and buy into the plan, need to be very fully involved. They may not be sitting in the room during every planning session, but they're engaged with the plan. They're shaping it in a certain sense by offering their influence, and they're being responded to. And they're likely to be shown a plan in draft and have a full chance to critique it before it's finalized. So it's a way to increase the size and number of the people who are involved in the planning process without overburdening the working size of the group that is shaping the plan. Then there are people who I call observers. That word may be a little misleading because they may not only be observing, but it means they're going to take an interest and watch what's happening. They can be included to some extent in the planning process. Some of my nonprofit clients like to survey people who would be in this outer ring and provide some feedback from them at the very beginning. They're not as actively influential as people in the consultant ring, but they're people whose feedback may be useful as the planning team comes together on some of the issues that they have to wrestle with. So with appreciation for different perspectives and understanding of what is important, you lay the foundation for a plan that can connect to the hearts and minds of your stakeholders, and you increase its chances for success. When your core planning team develops a sound understanding of your operating environment and the needs and concerns of your stakeholders, you're ready to craft the heart of the plan. The principle of leverage is an ancient wisdom principle. The focus of every wise plan is a small number of key goals, that usually no more than 3 to 5, that become the place to apply your will and effort together. Only with limited focus can you get enough leverage to accomplish something significant. Your goal statement needs to be actionable. They need to be stated in a way that leads toward concrete response. For example, a goal statement might be to increase funding for our core programs. Another goal statement that would be resource-oriented might be to build a $1 million endowment that will provide sustaining year-to-year funding. Another one that might be focused on service for an organization that is serving young families would be to develop and implement a new program to serve 300 first-time mothers per year with prenatal services. Sometimes goals involve very specific standards that you're trying to meet. Sometimes they don't. But once you have a goal, then what you need to do is you need to really consider it in light of your mission and vision and make sure it's really designed to carry your mission forward towards the vision that you want. It's essential to get you to the vision. And then you need to turn the goal into an action plan that has specific deadlines and accountability. Who is going to do this? When are they going to do it by? What resources do they need in order to make this action successful? And the lever is the action plan. The only way to move a significant goal for a nonprofit collaboration is with effort. Imagine the hands of a group of people all pressing down on this lever in unison. This is what a clear action plan makes possible. But there must be clear expectations for the who and the when, and a way to hold people accountable. So what were CETA's 2 original goals when they started out in this tremendously difficult operating environment, filled with challenge, with an empty bank account? They only had 2. They wanted to find a place to start, so they needed a location that needed to be free or cost almost nothing, and they wanted to begin to offer their program. But they had no equipment, they had no teachers, they had no books, they had a vision and a mission. So they opened their doors without computers or other equipment, with volunteers, and they made 250 photocopies of a computer keyboard and a computer monitor for their students to begin to learn skills on imaginary computers by typing rhythmically to songs that spoke to the hearts of the people they served, like Bob Marley's Redemption Song, which says, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." This is how they started, and for a few months they had nothing. And then corporations who noticed what they were doing began to donate used IBM computer equipment. And when that equipment arrived, their first donations of cast-off equipment, most of the students had already mastered a typing speed above 30 words a minute, and they were launched. You can go to see their website if you check them out on the internet. Today, 13 years later, they've attracted wealthy and inspired donors from all over the world, people like Oprah Winfrey, the head of Virgin Airlines, Bono, stars, rock stars, Hollywood stars. They have millions of dollars. They have a large campus. They have an amazing program. They're serving many, many people, and their graduates are already activating their mission. They're being hired in companies throughout South Africa, and they've left the margins of their society to assume leadership and citizenship roles. So many plans falter or veer off course because there's not enough attention paid to progress and assessment. So one of the things that your plan needs to anticipate is measuring success. While I speak about this, I want to also ask you to respond to another poll question that's coming out. And in addition to answering this poll question, You can also begin to formulate any other questions you'd like me to address, which I'll do in just a moment. I'm not going to say too much about success measures except to say that far more important than what flavor you use, and you can see some bullets here that indicate some different ways that people talk about success measures, it's that you pick some. They may be indicators that are as general as buzz about your collaboration in the community or audience enthusiasm or change in the number of inquiries you're getting about your services. They may have more hard and fast quantitative dimensions, what we talk about moving the needle, very specifically assessing whether there's a change that can be measured. Many people treat this, of course, as the gold standard for success because it's not subjective. They may include, if you're serving people in a community and working with young families, they may have to do with changes in infant mortality, lower school dropout rates, or an increase in grant funding received. There may be qualitative measures like increased morale, client satisfaction, positive changes in the answers of employees, clients, or community members on surveys. Pick ones that make sense to you and be disciplined enough to really use them and follow through on them to talk about how you're doing with your plan. When you do that, now you're ready to put your plan in a form that clearly communicates and is easy to implement. I like to call this a blueprint. If you've ever seen a set of plans, the top one is the overall picture of the project, and then there are details underneath it. So some organizations also like to create something called a dashboard. But I think a better practice is to create a single page that contains the plan foundation. And a wise plan has details like an action plan with names and accountabilities and timelines and budgets underneath it. But it's important to help those who are responsible to steward the plan forward stay together on the same page. So I want to let you know that in feedback to the two poll questions, 100% of the people involved in the call today have been a participant in strategic planning, and 33% of those who responded to the second question indicate that they have not seen the kind of affirmative results in implementation come from it that they might have hoped or wished for. So this gap between the aspiration of planning and the reality of it is what I want to continue to speak to with you. So the blueprint is a good tool. It has the key information that belongs on the top page of the planning document to make it a living document, one that you will continue to use. And in order to do that, it's really important to commit to periodic review of the plan and how it's going. So let's look specifically at what might go on your blueprint. So at the top, the statement of the mission, followed by your articulation of your vision of success, what you're really going for with this plan. Then the guiding values are right there in the heart of the blueprint. That's where they belong. They belong at the heart of all your conversations about key decisions and about the planning itself. Then the articulation of your clear, actionable goals. And finally, this updatable bottom part of the blueprint that you can show how your success indicators are reflecting back to you the progress or lack thereof that you're making. So as I said, you can have a Gantt chart or a Microsoft project spreadsheet or anything you want underneath this blueprint in order to make sure that the details you have in the plan are there. But I think this is a good practice so that this top sheet continues to remain in front of people regularly. They see it, they think about it, and they talk about it. I want to respectfully challenge you to bring the need for wiser, more effective planning to other leaders and change agents within your collaboration who share the responsibility to facilitate the journey from what is to what could be. From that one room in a violence-ridden neighborhood in Johannesburg, South Africa, with paper, pieces of paper, and people imagining that they were typing, to a city campus that exists today with teachers and up-to-date computer equipment and supporters around the world funding the dreams of the marginalized people of South Africa to integrate themselves fully into their modern society. Big things come from small beginnings, but all of them require a plan. The path is not a mystery. It requires intention and firm steps. There are no shortcuts. To reach your desired future, you need the right people with varied important perspectives engaged in a true learning conversation, a dialogue that's going to move them towards their dreams. When you're clear about the collaboration's purpose and the guiding values and principles for what you do and how you do it, then you can set your sights on the horizon, deal with the realities of your environment and the road you must travel, and map out some goals that will keep you moving towards your destination. But then you need the perseverance to modify, monitor, and keep moving. So what you can do is leave this webinar today and go back to your collaborative effort, if it's existing or it's planned, and move back into it, treating planning as the discipline that it deserves to be and an ongoing conversation that will keep you moving forward together. At least annually, develop a new plan or update your existing plan. And finally, really think about the accountability that the plan needs to have by selecting the kind of indicators that make sense to you to monitor your progress over time. So I want to take any questions that you have. I have one that's come in. How long does it take to develop all the elements of a wise plan? Well, I wish I could give you a hard and fast guideline. Some of it depends on what you already have that you can build upon. As I said, I don't think it's good to spend time wordsmithing a mission statement that already serves you well and that people believe is adequate. Although if the mission statement doesn't have the kind of inspirational quality, that's worth reaching for in order to strengthen its use to you. I work with groups usually over a period of something like 2 days, and that can be broken sometimes into half-day segments. I think you can treat all the elements of a good strategic plan within that time with a working group of, say, 10 to 12 key people. If a group works very well together, they don't necessarily need to have an outside facilitator. They can move through it expeditiously because of their good rapport and the dialogue that they have. But sometimes it can be helpful to have somebody serving in that role to keep the discussion focused and productive and effective. So that's a guideline for the length of time it takes. I think I have another question here, so I'll wait for that one to come up on the board in front of me, and then what is consensus and how do collaborations reach consensus? Well, the first thing to understand about consensus is what it is not, because some people tend to equate it with unanimity. And it's wonderful when everybody agrees to the same degree and with the same level of enthusiasm, but that's not as common as we might wish. So consensus essentially means broad support, that involves a functional high level of support where pretty much everyone accepts the plan or the goal and everybody is willing to support it, you know, with reasonable enthusiasm. But not everybody may fully agree. But usually it's been tested with enough dialogue, and the voices of people who don't necessarily fully agree were heard and fully considered. And that usually helps people who may not be on the winning side of a vote or a decision to move forward to feel respected and included and able to support the plan even if they don't fully agree with it. Collaborations only reach consensus through dialogue. The only way to do it, it's really a full contact sport, and it involves enough time for people, as I said, to be listened to and for the pros and cons of issues to be explored in a way where nobody feels that it's a railroad job or somebody's trying to steamroll or something through. So another question that's come up is how many sessions does it take to do the planning? Yes, it can be done in one long session. That's a companion question. There are reasons to do that when it's hard to get people together, and perhaps there's some urgency in terms of working through the planning process. I think the better practice is to spread out sessions that aren't quite as long. My favorite way to do it is to do half-day sessions in the morning when people are really fresh, and do one session a week for 4 weeks. Often what that allows people to do in 2 days spread over a month is to go away and reflect. It also enables people sometimes to take and go away and develop things and bring them back and show them as drafts to the working group when they reconvene. Just as an example, when people are drafting a mission statement, it can be almost painful, a little like periodontal work, to practice putting semicolons and adjectives in different places in a large group. But you can have a discussion about a mission statement and then send 2 or 3 people away to come up with a working draft that they bring back to the full group to show it to them. I'm working with a group right now that has gone away and created 3 or 4 alternative mission statements and then brought it back to a full group of 25 people to show them alternatives. That can focus the group discussion not so much on the semicolons and the adjectives, but different ways to approach the formulation of the mission statement. It's often easier for people to compare 2 things and say, well, I like A rather than B. When they're talking about a blank sheet, it's a little harder to get the group focused and move them forward productively. So those are some ways to think about the number of sessions and the planning. And with that, what I need to do is begin to complete my webinar to you today. And the first thing I'd like to do is offer you my support. So this is the contact information. If you have questions for me, if there's something I can do to explain something that I've treated in the webinar today that you would like a little more guidance about, you may contact me by email or by phone. I'd be happy to talk to you. And there are some resources available. There are actually quite a few resources available, but I've picked 2 that I like a lot. And then there's a list of resources at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence's website that I commend for you to go and explore. They have some wonderful resources that they put together. But both of the books that I mentioned here are books that I've used and have had on my shelf for many years, and they're filled with practical tools. So with that, I need to extend to you my thanks in all the different ways that I might be able to do that, because I know that you're part of the quality of life in our community with your work in the nonprofit sector and your collaborative efforts. So I commend you to continue them, to strengthen them, and I thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you very much.